Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today is already number 4 of my series, When I Feel. It's been a while that we've started and we're accumulating followers. Thank you so much for joining me again. I'm exactly the same place where I was last week, which is not that surprising these days. As you can see, I'm going to show you. This is, you can see the opera in Munich. Unfortunately, completely empty right now, as all other opera houses in the world right now. It's incredibly sad. And on top of that, the weather is terrible today, but this is all for the better. You know, we can dedicate ourselves to wonderful music, which we can listen to, although absolutely not a replacement to live experiences, at least for a little while, we can listen to at home. So today, episode number 4 will be about unconditional love. And of course, it's yet another huge topic, and you can, there's so much you could say about that, and at the same time, nothing really can describe feelings of that intensity. And I picked for that a piece that means a lot to me. That's Rosenkavalier by Strauss, and that's actually my absolutely favorite opera. And it's funny enough that I'm actually here in Munich right now because Munich is absolutely famous for its for the Rosenkavalier performances that took place here. We all know Carlos Kleiber's famous version, which I've actually recommended for tonight. So you'll see the link down there at the end, and it's actually right in that building that you just saw, or you saw there on the left side. That's where all those incredible shows of that piece happen, and the very very famous production took place. That was basically in the repertoire for about 50-60 years, I think. So just got removed recently. So that's a legendary Rosenkavalier house. And for me, Rosenkavalier has a very special meaning, not only just in my life, but also it's an opera in general. So I have to admit that I came to opera quite late. I have come absolutely from the symphonic world, and I grew up with symphonies and chamber music, and I'm a string player myself. And so for a very long time, I was very skeptical about operas. First of all, I wasn't quite sure that the music was always as great as some of the music of the symphonic repertoire. And also I was very surprised by these libretti that I read, because the stories were quite simple to say, to be honest. It was always, there was somebody who loved somebody, and usually they could not have them. And there was somebody evil that either wanted one of them or killed them both, or maybe not, but something along these lines. Very, very simple storylines. And so I thought, okay, you can enjoy opera for the music, but which is, it's mainly, it's a musical piece with a stage aspect to it. And I couldn't quite find a piece where I felt, okay, this whole idea of what they call in German Gesamtkunstwerk, where it's like a complete piece of art, where the libretto, the story is just as great as the music and so on, until I discovered Rosenkavalier. And in a way, you could even read the libretto of Hofmannsthal almost like a novel. You could just start and read it through. It has incredible poetry. And I would say it's one of the only operas I know where the libretto is almost as great as the music itself. And so I got into that piece, and I'm one of, I guess I'm not the only one that absolutely adores this wonderful opera. And I was very lucky to have performed it for the first time last year. And after years and years of studying it, I got even more and more obsessed with it. And the one thing that is unusual about this piece is that in most operas that let's say in the Italian repertoire, or many other pieces, you have quite static characters. There's something that they want, and there's an obstacle that prevents them of achieving that. And at the end, they either do or they die, or something along these lines. It's quite simplistic. And usually you find, if you look for more complex stories where characters go through a very, very big development, or let's say a long process or a journey, you find that in novels, you find that in a lot of theater, a lot of spoken theater. But in opera, it's very rare to find a piece where characters really go through a long and total transformation. And that's something that for me is very, very special about this piece, because each one of the characters starts in one place and ends in a completely other place by the end of the piece. And the piece is all about that journey that they go through, and the total transformation of where they've arrived by the end of the story, by the end of the piece. So when you mention Rosenkavalier, there's a lot of stereotypes and cliches, and everybody, of course, sees in it something else, and everybody has a different idea of what it is actually about. And so, of course, the story, you could look at let's say the official story. It's about this, a man who wants to get married. Of course, it's an arranged marriage. So he goes to his cousin, who arranges somebody to come and propose to this young lady that he picked. Well, actually, he arranged to marry with her own father, and so on and so forth. And that's how that all goes wrong. There's this whole story. So let's say the Knight of the Rose is this young man who goes to deliver that proposal. That's, let's say, the official story. I don't think that is of any importance to the piece. You could tell this story, as you just as much could tell a completely different story. It's of absolutely no importance. Then you have, of course, everybody knows the monologue of the Marshal, the time monologue from the first act, and it's sort of become this let's say legendary piece of nostalgia and, you know, of fear of dying and fear of aging, and this Marshal having complexes about growing old, and so you always use it as you hear it as a kind of an image for somebody who cannot come to terms with aging. And that's, again, I find very, very sentimental, and absolutely not what the piece is about either. For me personally, at least not the main thing what the piece is about. And of course you hear, oh yes, it's all about waltzes and nostalgia in this kitchen. You have this like sort of this nostalgic old world sentiment that Strauss was looking backwards, because of course he had already written Salome and Electra by that point. And so it's, in a way, you could say it's a backwards looking piece in terms of the musical language. But in a sense, it's absolutely revolutionary. And I'll prove to you in a minute why that's the case. So for me, all the waltzes and the Viennese folklore is absolutely not central to the identity of the piece. For me, the piece is all about three main characters who go through three completely different journeys, and each one of them have a task of something they have to find out on this journey. And these are all three journeys to find out how to love. And this is the Marschallin, the main lady, Octavian, who is her lover, is a man played by sung by a mezzo-soprano, and Sophie, who is the woman that he ends up falling in love with. And these three women, and interestingly, actually, for that time, that they were composed for three women, although one of them is a man in the story, go through these three totally different journeys of understanding, getting to know themselves, what love means to them, what they need to learn in order to be able to love, and where they have failed. And in many ways, it's also a story about failure and about embracing failure. So these three women have or actually already the fact that the story is told by three women. If we look at it, 1910. I mean, this is more than 100 years ago. This is an absolutely revolutionary situation, because you have a story told by three women, but not in this normal kind of sense where you have, of course, Tosca. It's the same idea of the hysterical, jealous, sort of artist, singer, let's say dancer / prostitute in Traviata, whatever. This is not about a woman who is an object in the eyes of a man. It's about three women who go through their own journey, which is already quite unusual for the time, and absolutely forward thinking. Then the overture of the piece, when, you know, in the 19th century, we're used to having these overtures like, let's say, Freischütz or Fledermaus, or in any of those operas where you would hear all the themes that would later come in the piece, one after the other, and it would be like a little collage of all those pieces. And you had, of course, sometimes shorter overtures, but they always had a sort of a decorative function. And Rosenkavalier starts with the two motifs that will go through the whole piece, the Octavian motif and the Marschallin motif, in the first 4 bars, and you've got it in the horns, and then you've got it in the strings. These are the two motifs. They're completely yin and yang, absolutely equality of the man and woman in this basically 3-minute orgasm. I mean, this 3-minute overture is the first depiction I know in classical music of a female orgasm, and you'll find very, very obvious climax. I mean, I don't need to go into more detail, otherwise I'll get blocked by YouTube for, you know, inappropriate material. In any case, and that in itself, telling the story of an opera about the love of a woman and the eroticism of a woman from her point of view, of course, written by 2 men, which is in a way complicated thing in itself, but was quite extraordinary for that time. And in order to let's say look into which tasks each one of the characters had and how their journeys differed, we have to that in itself, telling the story. We have a little technical problem here, and I'm back with you right now. Sorry, my screen was doubled. So In order to tell you a little bit and to get into the journey of each one of the three characters and how they differed, I need to give you a very quick description of what's happening in the piece. So if we think about it, we have in the first act, we see the Marshal and the Octavian, who is her young lover. He is much, much younger than her, in her bed after they have done what they have done, as we've discussed. And this is the whole act is basically about her being convinced that one day he will leave her because, or she will have to leave him actually because he's too young for her, because she's married, her husband is not there. And it's all about her doubts of why he will find a different woman that he will then love, a woman on eye level. And it's all about him insisting that he will always love her. And this whole basically long love scene between the two of them discussing that dynamic. When her cousin comes, Baron Ox, who has a very big role in the piece, in terms of how often he sings and how much he sings. Yet at the same time, to my opinion, he's of absolutely no importance in terms of the core development of the core, let's say the core content of the piece. In any case, in the second act, I'm going to shorten this because you can all read it on Wikipedia. It's not really the point. In the second act, the Octavian is entrusted with the task of going to propose to Sophie, who is the lady the girl that Baron Ox would like to marry. And when Octavian goes to do that, he ends up falling in love with her, and she does with him too. And then there's a whole massive problem that starts about how to free Sophie from Ox, who is this disgusting, sleazy, fat old man, usually, from having to marry him, and how they can, so to say, get together in this very beautiful romantic way. In the third act, after a whole intrigue that involves tons of different people, the Marshal in herself actually helps the couple get together by tricking Baron Ox into a trap, and ends up in a way letting go of her own love for the sake of her love being happy. So this is you could say, a very typical story of, let's say, sacrifice and so on and so forth, but it's a lot more subtle than that. And the Marshal is not quite as selfless as it seems. So let's start with Octavian. Octavian has I would say the simplest of all journeys. He's also the simplest of those three characters. He's extremely eager. He is absolutely sure that he is totally in love with the Marshal. He cannot imagine anything else in the world in that moment except wanting to have as much sex with her as he can, being all over her all the time. And when she keeps on, the whole first act, she keeps on basically creating distance between the two of them by saying, oh, whoever hugs too strongly cannot hold anything. And she says, you should always love and let go. And when it's all about creating distance and creating a little bit of protection and security for herself, not to get too involved. And he always is absolutely convinced that there's nothing else. And then comes the second act, and 5 seconds later, he completely forgot her, and he's madly in love with Sophie, as if there's nothing else either. And in a way, when the whole situation gets solved in the end, he is stuck in this dilemma of, on one hand, being very, very grateful to the Marshal for being able to put his own happiness above her own, and at the same time, this other form of love to his new object of admiration, which is Sophie. And you could say that his task is basically to find out what feeling is consistent, what feeling is sustainable, because he just knows this incredible infatuation that goes away the moment it comes. And that's his task, to find out what stays, what has value, what has substance. And Sophie, on the other hand, whom we only get to know in the second act, she has a totally different problem, because she's used, this is very typical, let's say, the idea of this young girl who defines herself always through the other people and the way they see her. And she basically starts with a situation where it's dictated to her, as was common at the time, who she's going to marry. And the fact that she actually has her own will of what she wants, that she does not want to be with this man, and finding out what she wants. And her will goes back and forth between what she feels, what she thinks she should do, her guilt towards her father, and so on and so forth. That goes back and forth all the time. And it's interesting to see her own journey, of her own process of learning to become her own person, and not defining herself through the way other people see her, but defining and finding out what her real wishes and emotions are, which is also on a feminist level was totally out of, basically decades, if not centuries ahead of its time. You could even say that in some places today, it's not, unfortunately, not yet a given. And in the very end of the third act, when the whole situation gets solved, the Marshal says a very interesting and very telling sentence to Sophie. She says to her, "Don't talk too much, you're pretty enough." And that shows in a way what image she has to struggle with, that in a way she's this pretty little girl that doesn't have a personality, that should just kind of do what she's told and shut up. And she doesn't need to try to be clever because she's pretty enough and can convince otherwise. And of course, in a way, the Marshal is a bit jealous of that, but yet at the same time, this is also Sophie's task to become her own person, and to claim that own identity. And now we get to the Marshal, who is definitely the most, of the three characters, the one who sings least in terms of duration, and the one who is, of course, by far the most important character in the piece. And the Marshal, from the very beginning, talks about how one day she will have to give him up, Octavian, that she will have to let him go. In fact, she's not afraid of having to let him go. She's actually afraid of him leaving her. And she does everything she possibly can to make sure that happens. In a way, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the whole first act is based on her constantly putting distance, as I mentioned before, and making sure that she does not make herself in any way truly vulnerable. But Octavian is not interested in her because she shows him the great adventures of, I don't know, somebody who has 20 years more of erotic experiences, or somebody who is, or this adventure. He's actually interested in getting to know who she really is, but she never allows him to see that. She never allows him to see any kind of weakness, and she only shows herself as this projection. There's always a clear superiority of the Marshal being the one setting the rules, the one being always above him, not only age-wise, but in terms of control and in terms of also emotional protection. And as long as that superiority is there, there is no risk for her to ever being able to really be hurt. But also, there's no chance for him to fall in love with her, because he will never see her real self. And so this brings us to the topic of today, in a sense, because by the end of the piece, she basically gives him up and helps him. And she says that also in the first act, I need to love him in a way that I also love whoever he loves. So in a way, be happy for his happiness. And at the same time, you would say that it is her task is actually not to learn to love him, but it is in a way to learn to love herself, because she never gave him the chance to love her truly, because she never thought he would, and she never thought that she's worth being loved, that the way she is, with all her weaknesses, with all her incredible contradictions, would be of any interest to him, or of true interest. So she never let him close to her. And at the end, she lets go, and she finally finds a way to love him for the way he really is, and feels what real love is. And you ask yourself, is there such thing as unconditional love? Because you could say that she loves him so greatly that she's even happy for him that he's happy with somebody else. I don't really believe in that. I think we're all selfish beings to some degree or another. And there is perhaps the only setting in life where I believe there is total unconditional love is between a mother and a child. So I don't think the Marshal ever obtains the situation or the feeling of unconditional love, which is today's topic. I think she learns that her task is to learn to truly love herself and her weaknesses, and in a way accept that she can only be truly loved by others for her imperfect self, not for the superior controlled self that she always presented. And I would like to finish with a quote of Paul McCartney, that actually of the Beatles, and it's the last song that they recorded on the Abbey Road album, called The End, where they say, "The love you take is equal to the love you make." And I think that's so telling about this whole Rosenkavalier story, where we end up at the end of the piece and all three characters have gone through a whole journey of learning, of developing, of growing, to know how to love, and to know themselves, to know how they love, and come to the conclusion that in a way, ultimately, it's all about accepting the love to oneself. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was more of a slightly, let's say, psychological session today, but in a way, Rosenkavalier is a piece that I don't really feel you can you can talk and analyze the music of it. If you think about this journey and you listen to the piece, and this recording is a live recording of Carlos Clive, it's absolutely wonderful. You will feel all of those processes, all of those journeys in the sensuality of the music. And I hope I gave you a little bit of a let's say, a guideline to go with that. Next week, I have a little surprise for you. From next week onwards, I'll have a guest every time who will join me, and we'll talk about a different topic every week, a different guest. Thank you so much. The link for the recording is down here. Join me next week at the same time, Saturday, 6 o'clock. Thank you so much.